My guest is a combo platter of kindness and quick wit and an ability to get up at 2 a.m. You will recognize Savannah Guthrie from co-anchoring NPC's Today Show every morning. And because she is friends with so many of my friends, I have been pretending that we are close
We
for
are.
years. Today, she is
Up,
coming to
bestie.
us. Thank you. I accept our new solidified and notarized best friendship. She's written a gorgeous book of spiritual reflections called Mostly What God Does. Savannah, thank you so much for doing this.
Kate, I'm so happy we're together. I'm glad that I'm glad it's mutual because you are also a best friend in my mind, and we have a whole friend group,
I
and
do. We do.
we
Yes.
all know who's in it too.
We
You
really
might not know
do.
that I'm in it, but I'm in it. All of you.
Absolutely. And I guess that's why it feels so special for me because you're the person I feel like I can kind of let my hair down with and be like, oh my gosh, some of these topics are sort of awkward to talk about being the kind of people we are. So I thought it was so lovely that you're like, I just want to talk about faith for a while, even in this very cosmopolitan world where we would rather be self-reliant and kind of make the world predictable. But I just wondered then, like, why did it feel important to you to just do a book of reflections about who God is?
It's so funny because I'm the last person who should write a book about faith. I'm definitely certainly no theologian, and I'm certainly no life to emulate or model. I'm no example of moral rectitude. So that's my like disclaimer. So what business do I have writing about faith? None, except for that I love God. I love Jesus, and turns out he loves me too. I love to talk about this God that I know. And mostly what I like to say is that he really, really loves people.
Mm,
And you in particular, a person who is reading this book.
yeah. It is weird too how vulnerable it does. Like, I'm I'm just thinking about how when I was going through something really difficult, that was maybe the first time it started to feel almost embarrassing to talk about God because what I felt very like the kind of love that I felt difficult to explain. Like it was easier for me to give like a lecture or kind of like lead with an expertise but it was in the middle of my cancer diagnosis and that very strange experience after in the hospital where I mean, and the more common question I got was like, well, isn't that the time where your faith unraveled? Like, God is not fair. This world is not fair. Nothing's really coming together. And like the thing I felt almost too embarrassed to say was like, no, for some reason in the middle of this, I felt so absurdly loved and like loved by other people and loved by God. And somehow this thing that sometimes faith that sometimes like, I don't know, crystallized in the worst times ends up being this like beautiful golden thread that runs through the rest of how I guess I know how to think about being loved.
Isn't it astonishing? Only God could pull that off. It's so divine. There's no other
Yeah.
word for it. How is it
Yeah.
that at your moment of despair and question, how is it that you could possibly feel the most loved? Only God. Of course, it's divine. And I so relate to that. And I lost my father when I was 16 years old. And I remember friends, we were teenagers, friends saying, like, well, what about your faith now? I bet you have a lot of doubts. And I remember saying, no, this is when I need him the most. This is the
Yeah.
last moment I should be abandoning my faith. This is when I actually really need
Yeah.
it. I can't say
Yeah.
there haven't been other times and other moments where, of course, I questioned or of course I doubted. I never felt like I doubted that God existed. I feel grateful that that's not my particular challenge, but I have often doubted what God's intentions toward me were, whether he loved me, whether he really was kind and compassionate, or whether he was a brutal taskmaster above meting out difficult and humiliating, painful life lessons in service of some great spiritual growth that I certainly couldn't attain. You know,
Oh
it's
my
like,
gosh. You sound exactly like me when you describe that, where you're like, there's a long stretch where I wondered if I was being judged and failing horribly all the time.
yeah, like I was sure of it. And then, that's the book is a lot about that. And that's what, I mean, that's the whole thing about the book. It's called Mostly What God Does. Spoiler alert, the rest of the sentence is mostly what God does is love you. While we're imagining this brutal overlord sitting in terrifying judgment, mostly what he is doing is loving us. That does not mean that he does not see or judge our flaws, but because in our faith tradition, because of the great love and sacrifice of Christ, God doesn't see that. He doesn't, he sees past those flaws. And, you know, that gets into like a big theological discussion, but I feel like that's my big aha of faith. And when you were talking about being in the hospital and the worst happening to you, and that being the moment of your deepest connection, again, I see that as God's calling card and his hallmark. I write that I spent so many years afraid that I was going to get my comeuppance and calamity was right around the corner. And God's, again, painful and humiliating lesson was just right around the corner. And I surely deserved it and couldn't withstand it. And then some bad things did happen. And what I
Yeah.
learned was my fear of the bad thing was worse than the actual bad thing, because my fear of the bad thing always left out the crucial element, which was the saving presence of God himself. When you actually go through a thing that's hard and you actually face your crucible, what you find out is that God is right there with that sweet and unmistakable presence. And it's not that you would choose the hard thing, but boy, you wouldn't trade that experience of knowing God and experiencing him that way.
I said something really awkward exactly like that, where I remember I was like right in the middle of treatment, and I was talking to an Old Testament professor who I really love. And she's just someone I felt so comfortable having those, like, I think I'm on the edge of a spiritual thought and I don't exactly know how to say it. And I kept saying, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. And I definitely didn't mean I don't want to go back to being a person that doesn't have stage 4 cancer and and like I would trade that in a heartbeat. I would go back and unlearn those lessons.
Yes.
I mean, 3, 2, take me back.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Don't be telling the lesson.
But
Good
there's
reader,
this
I'll memorize them. Show me, just tell me.
exactly. Exactly. Put me in a movie with time travel, return me to being 34. And like but the truth of what I was like just trying to like figure out how to land on was that there was like this terrible beautiful discovery that you can only have when you have genuinely come to the end of yourself.
Right.
And then to see like, oh wait, God was also in front of me and like also behind me and also and still somehow I feel like still somehow I feel loved. I I found that because I guess I just never wanted to sort of like land on that, I think, absurd and incomplete thought that like, it's the end of every celebrity interview. And it made me who I am today. Right? You never want to say that. And yet, like there are precious truths we learn that we don't want to forget.
I mean, of course, we're so shaped by, yes, the positive experiences, but also the adversity that we encounter. And I think, and I've said this occasionally to friends who are going through a trial of their own. And I hope it's okay to say it. I hope I convey it the right way. But I often say, here you are in this moment that is so difficult and everything is coming so sharply into focus that you have a superpower. You know what matters in this moment. And
Yeah.
you have a sixth sense now for blessing. You have a sixth sense for what matters. You're on a different plane now than the rest of us bozos just going around on a Tuesday mad that the barista got our name wrong. Like you're in a different level. And that's not to say that you'd rather be Tuesday. You know, Kate would like to be pre 34, healthy as a horse, and never have the knowledge that you had to have. Of course, we all would. But since you are there anyway,
Yeah.
we just recognize that
Yeah.
you have a powerful moment and a powerful access to wisdom and truth and a powerful sixth sense for goodness, love, and blessing. I don't know why it is that way, but it is.
I do not hate any of that. If I heard that pep talk, I would love it. Because it gets us to like what do we get when we're trying to become wiser? And so much of it is the beauty and the terror of a different kind of awareness. And I guess that's one of the things I found so really like remarkable about you is you have to live with a very intense awareness all the time and then balance that with the other truths that you know. Like you wake up every morning with this horrible list. If
Yeah.
you wouldn't mind telling me about the overnight notes that you receive.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going to start forwarding it to you just to ruin your day. No, I wrote this whole essay. It's called The Overnight Note because we have an email that goes out every night. Unimaginatively, it is called The Overnight Note because we work on a morning show and the producers, the senior producers, and the anchors, we sleep at night. But there's a whole staff of people that are up all night, different time zones, collecting news, but they also keep track of everything that's happened essentially in a 24-hour period. And they put it all in this document with headlines and links. That's all it is, headlines and links. It's pages and pages long. And it's like everything horrible and terrible everywhere all at once. And that is my wake up. You know how they're like, don't put your phone next to your bed or don't read news right before. It's like, it's my job to wake up and read this note.
Yeah.
And it is astonishing. It is like waking up and falling down a hole and then trying to climb emotionally back out. And you don't want to become so numb to it or anesthetized. And then you got a whole other set of problems, but you can't be so beset and overcome. So it's trying to strike that balance. And that I think about it all the time, how you hold on to hope in a world that globally and watching the news invites despair, but also personally and locally in your own life with your own setbacks, your own disappointments also can invite despair. And what are we supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
And I don't know is the answer.
Yeah. Well,
Spoiler alert, I don't know.
I think it sounds like you're really good at figuring out how to adjust the dials. Because, like, I hear you saying hear, you have like a wide bandwidth for awareness. And then you're just like adjusting the dial on fear, adjusting the dial on hope. And then, like, and also just sounds like there's a dial in the middle too, which is like, hey, I'm a person and stuff's actually going on in my life. And then, like, allowing your own friends and relationships and whatever help you figure out like what your capacity then could be.
Yeah. And I think it's also, this is a job. It's personal. I mean, it's not personal. It's a job. I'm supposed to be a professional. I'm not supposed to read the news and then dissolve into my own personal reaction after every script that I read. I'm supposed to read it. I'm supposed to understand it. I'm supposed to connect with it. Yes, emotionally, but only to convey the importance of the matter, the significance of it. So I'm supposed to be connected emotionally, but I'm not supposed to be a mess. I'm not supposed to be a wreck. And I think knowing and feeling that it's a profession helps me keep a lot of this at bay. But there is a price to be paid over time when you're continually trying to overcome and rise above and not have a feeling that you should feel when you read a headline about a mother who killed her toddlers. Like you don't want to be the person who reads a headline like that and it doesn't even have an impact. And I don't want to become that person. So I'm trying to just have that balance. And I think some of it is really just nothing more than in the morning, I got a job to do. I'm going to do that. And when it's over, I don't need to have cable news on all day long. I don't need to read every single website. I know what time I need to wake up and what I need to read to brief myself. And I try to set some boundaries that way.
That's lovely. Especially when, okay, so one thing I really relate to about your description of being in the world is like sensitivity and awareness and kind of being able like a vigilance, which makes you amazing at your job. Like you're so good at connecting with people. You're so intuitive and like you can feel the compassion in all of it. And then, but aware people are aware people, and awareness is is the worst. Like we can hear criticism faster. Like,
That's why we need God. I mean, that's why we need someone outside this brain matter. And I'm so glad that you're here with me on the agita and anxiety train. It's funny because I'm writing this book and I would send it to the editor, and all of a sudden I'd be like, do I sound like a complete neurotic basket case? Like, I sound insane. Like, it's like, cause I'm like, oh, I worry about this. I worry about that. I have this guilt. I have this shame. I have all the, it's like that radio station is always on in perfect clarity with no static in my brain. And, it's I need perspective. I need something outside myself. You
yeah,
know, I read this quote. I can't remember now if it's either Oswald Chambers or C.S. Lewis, maybe Eugene Peterson. Unclear. We'll Google it. But basically, it says something like, God is the only accurate way to understand ourselves.
hmm,
It's like I'm not a reliable judge of my character. I will either be way too lenient or more likely in my particular psyche, way too harsh.
if I listened mostly to my own inner voice, whenever people are like, look inside, I'm like, inside is actually a bit of a problem.
Yeah, you run screaming for your life.
Or it's like a grab bag of, ways that I've been formed from like growing up. And, the reason why I am a very hyper vigilant and sensitive person in the first place, like all the things that went into that wiring is pretty difficult to, I guess, manage without some kind of, I guess I'm describing an intervention, but like,
Therapy. I was about to say without therapy or medication.
exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
positive on both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. One of the things that struck me about your thinking is that you're you're in a place of like, when you kind of tell when you get into a season of life where you like feel accumulated wisdom, like you kind of got somewhere. Like there were others, almost like if you went around the same circle of some same theological questions, you found that you were actually just like deepening when you thought maybe you'd just been taking a break. And I really enjoyed listening to you describe like the feeling then of being loved for like in for this long, like for the in this stage of your life, like that in the mostly what God does is love us is a life that is in the process of being transformed. And I work at a Methodist seminary, so we talk a lot about like what people get confused in self-help and wellness world as just progress, but like what we're really hoping for, right, is sanctification. Like we're hoping that we might be transformed by all this love. So I guess it kind of made me wonder, what are some things about who you are now that feel like they've been deepened by love? And where do you hope it will go?
That is a really good question. I mean, the part of myself that is the taskmaster, and you see a lot of this, I think, in the book, although hopefully with a nice velvet glove approach, is me telling myself, and now if you have been so loved, you got to get out there and share it. And not because you have to. It's not really taskmaster. You'll do it because you just can't help it. How could you hold it within? Like if you really saw it, if you let yourself glimpse it, how would you possibly be able to contain it? I always joke, it's like if you found a stain remover that got red wine stains off of your white couch and it worked really great, like you would be calling all of your girlfriends and being like, you got to get the Chateau spill. It works. I don't know how, but it does. Right. So I kind of feel that way about God's love. So that's the first thing I feel, if I've sort of been let in on this secret, that I'm supposed to share it. That's my purpose, is to
Yeah.
share. My purpose is just to tell
Yeah.
people, but hopefully in a way that doesn't feel like a throwaway or super shallow. But I also think, they always say that the preacher preaches the sermon that he or she needs to hear. So I wrote the book that I need to have and read and continue to read. And this idea of mostly what God does is love you, mostly what God does has been doing is loving you. Like while you were flitting off and making mistakes, or when you were super devout and you were overconfident, either way, he was mostly just loving you. I write about in the very beginning of the book my growing up in a really churchy background, and then having and a lot of the guilt, and oh, the Lord was convicting me about this, and oh my gosh, failing all the things. I drank and smoke as a young girl. Like I did all the, so like being sort of devout one day and then terrible the next, and all that stuff. And then once I got older, it was less about those kinds of things and more about like, hey, this is a season I'm reading and getting up every morning and I'm reading my Bible and I'm doing my Bible study and I'm memorizing verses. I'm in this season of great connection and devotion to God. And then falling out of it and not barely doing a thing for years and years and feeling guilty and kind of ashamed and like, oh, am I out on a limb here? And is God gonna like have to come crack down on me hard to like pull me back into the fold and all this stuff? And what I realized when I looked at my whole life and the whole seasons of devotion, seasons of despair and distance, that either way, mostly what God does was loving me the whole time. Mostly God was just there loving me. He wasn't saying, wow, Savannah, you're really coasting on fumes, aren't you? You haven't learned anything new in a long, long time. Or,
Yeah.
he's just like, we ask ourselves, does God want this for me? Is this the right path? It's like, I don't know. All I know is God wants to be closer to us. That's the trajectory.
Yeah.
So you can ask yourself and figure out for yourself whether or not this path or that path brings you closer or farther from God. But that's the trajectory. The trajectory is closeness and love. Like, are you headed in that general direction? Then you're probably going the right way.
Yeah.
And about, this job or that job, I think God cares. And sometimes I just feel like he can work with anything. He can work with our screw ups. You know what? You should have taken the job at Pete's Coffee, not at Starbucks. Either way, Pete's, Starbucks, he's God. He can work it out, It's like the question is really am I going in the direction of closeness and intimacy? That's always where he's at.
Mhm.
That's always what he wants.
Do you remember those old choose your own adventures where I always end up being like, you've been page 42, you've been eaten by a bear.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, if only 7, I had the strawberry milkshake. Sliding doors.
it does. It feels like in this version of choose your own adventure, you just like every page is like, oh, you are in a tar pit. You are also loved. It'll be fine. Like,
It's kind of how I feel in the end. And maybe that's, I don't know. I mean, again, like I'm 52 years old and I know a little couple things, but I'm more aware of what I don't know. So maybe this is just going to end up being like, ha, that was crazy. But the way I feel right now is God is just like, yeah, let's just be together.
yeah,
Let's just, I'm interested in you. You come, you will be blessed by more of me in your life.
yeah,
Let's do that together. And
yeah,
we'll worry about the rest and the circumstances and all that. Like the goal is to get close so you can feel loved. Because when you feel that love, you won't be the same. And everything around you will be different. And in that way, when God shares his love and deputizes us with his love, well, now he has all of us. We're headed out into the world. We're different people.
it kind of reminds me of something Beth Moore said to me one time when I was describing a really difficult thing where I was like, I don't know, Beth, like, I don't like, I'm doing this really hard thing. I don't even think it's going to get better, honestly. Like this particular thing, I actually just don't think it's going to get better. And it is actually unbearable. And she just said it with so much love. She was like, hun, you are going to keep operating in love. You're going to keep working really hard at what you know that you have to do. And by the time you have to make a different decision, if you have to make one, you will be changed. And like, I loved that as like the like a promise of love is like, if you just keep being immersed in it, even if it's in the horrible time, like by the time you get to, turn to page whatever, like you will have been transformed by love. So maybe then even then the thing I'm scared about, or the things in my life that are the boulders that won't move. I just felt like if love's there, like I'll be changed enough, deepened enough maybe, that like
And believing that is faith, because you're not sure. And when you're in that moment, you're like, well, that sounds good. And I sure hope that happens. But that's faith. You know, you're not given a video like, hey, this is your future. See, you're changed. It worked.
I
You
want
have
that.
you have to believe that while it's not changed, while you're couldn't imagine change.
Spectacular. Savannah, you are um fundamentally loving. And that quality is obvious to everyone who watches you. And what a privilege then to know you. Thanks so much for doing this with me today.
Thank you, Kate. I loved it.